So everybody, thank you for coming to the privacy talks. This time, I'm very honored to invite the expert in advertising and new technologies with the privacy. This is a very exclusive interviews with Mr. Tim. So glad to have a talking today.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you. First of all, let me make an introduction about Tim. He is a general manager, privacy and consumer experiences at LiveRamp, the leader in identity resolution and the data onboarding. Previously, he held leadership roles at Group M, but not Connect, and Improve Digital, where he was responsible for strategy, innovation, and partnerships. He also co-founded and was the chairman of the first pragmatic IAB Task Force in Europe. Currently, he serves as a board member for IAB Netherlands. Tim knows the digital media and the technologies business inside out, and it's just as comfortable in the commercial, operational, and technical aspects of the industry. Outside of his high-level roles, Tim is an avid supporter of innovation and education. He loves to help and inspire others and speaks regularly at the global events. So great welcome to Mr. Tim, and I'm very honored to have a talk with you this moment.
Very honored to be here. This is actually my first talk for Japan, so it's very exciting for me.
Awesome. So yeah, let's get started our first topics. I want to explore your story together. So you have many experiences in the advertisement business so far. Then your first business was in Group M. You had work with the advertisement solutions. So during the experiences, so what did you do at the Group M and the experiences there?
Yeah, thank you. So again, super excited to be here. Actually, my career didn't really start at Group M. I ended up at Group M through the acquisition of a company called Banner Connect. It was when I started there, it was a relatively small company, just a few people. And it was before programmatic. It wasn't even called programmatic back then. We used to call it automated trading. There were quite a few names for it around, but there was no consensus on what it exactly was. Real-time bidding didn't exist yet at that point. And what we did do was setting up linking agreements on a platform called Right Media, which was like a really early precursor to programmatic. And the good thing about that was, like, even though we were a relatively small Dutch company, we could trade globally on that platform. So we were setting up deals with Yahoo. We were buying inventory of Facebook when they were still running display ads. And that is really how my career started. Trading inventory, setting up publisher accounts, making sure that campaigns were reaching the right audience, doing yield management, making sure that as an advertising network, we had the best possible CPMs. And right around that time, you can see the SSPs, like the sell-side platforms, coming up. And they were monetizing or helping publishers monetize their inventory better, making use of all this new technology. And I started getting into that. We started dealing with the SSPs more. Then obviously on the other side, there were DSPs, like demand-side platforms, platforms that are used to purchase digital inventory. And in the beginning, it wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is right now. There was still a lot of human intervention. And like I kind of grew up in that, and like there was not really a good place for people in that community to talk about this. So I remember around 2009, I reached out to the local IAB and it was like, we want to set up a task force and so that we can talk about all these new developments. But what I underestimated is how much the rest of the, let's say, the more traditional advertising space people, that they didn't want to talk about that, right? Because it was disrupting their business. So yeah, that's kind of like how it started for me.
I see. I used to work in on the Japanese e-commerce giant before. Then, the industry is been changing and so radical at the times because of the consumer is becoming to using the digital commerce, digital purchases through the advertisement, the key elements to accessing the consumers. So that's kind of the very gross much parts than the many technical complications is coming into that the parts, I guess. So, and yeah, I found it that's the you work with the you own the startups after that the like the leave in a group and then they're also the very innovative approach that's because I just lead up to your blog, so you have a three main concepts and you try to focus on the customer centrics. So how did you came up this idea and why did you start your own startups?
So so after I worked at Banner Connect, I actually went there for a second time. So in between, I was at Improve Digital, a European sell-side platform. And throughout all those experiences, and like so much was happening in those early years, a lot of innovation. And at one point, I saw the introduction of privacy regulation coming, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a friend of mine who had a company who were singled out by the local data protection authority, and there was a large report written on what they were doing wrong. And I was thinking by myself, it's like they're basically doing retargeting, the same as everyone else in the industry. And the government came up with a cookie law. Later, GDPR was introduced. And given that I actually understood pretty well like how the trading mechanisms work and how cookie matching works, and I started doing some research on all these pages, and I was like, okay, there are 40 trackers here. So there are 40 third companies here. There are 80 there. And at first I was thinking, okay, this is just super inefficient, right? Like, why are they not just thinking of one identity? And this was way before the entire market started talking about identity. And so in my mind, it was always like, there is a solution for this. We're just not doing it right. Like, what we're seeing here is already legacy business. Like the mechanism of storing third-party cookies, like it was never meant for that. And I was thinking about ways to do that better. And then at the end of 2016, those ideas like became more clear. I knew
Mm-hmm.
that GDPR now was coming for real. I started reading it, digesting it, like looking at the very specifics of it. And I started thinking about like, how would you transform that into technology? So I reached out to a few people that I've been together in the industry with for, I don't know, like 9 years at the time. Um, and I spoke to them as like, okay, do you think this could be viable? Should there be a different way of operating? And they were kind of excited, but it was also still very conceptual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we decided to start a company together. I already had like a name that I was pretty set on, like, so that was not really negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
But we started thinking about that problem, and we introduced a fourth person to the founding team, because when we were going for like, hey, what would the solution be? We found a what we thought was a great solution in blockchain. Like the
Mm-hmm.
decentralization part of it, giving consumers just access to their personal node of information. That sounded like super exciting, and that was like exactly what we were looking for at the time, because we needed an infrastructure or a piece of technology that could support our mission to give consumers control and choice over their data.
Mm-hmm.
So we started, like, let's say we started developing around blockchain. Like we spoke to some of the, let's say, infrastructure providers at the time. And I'm not quite sure if we really lost a lot of time there, but we learned a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
because of what we learned there, we figured out what we needed to do properly. Quickly back to blockchain. So we struggled with that topic for about I don't know, like 8 or 9 months, learned a lot, wanted to do an ICO to raise money, create a token for users to manage their personal data. But on the R&D side, so conceptually, all of that was fine. But on the R&D side, it was really complicated. Like blockchain was slow. It was very immature. Like there wasn't any documentation. And while we were doing all of that, we slowly started figuring out like, okay, privacy and identity, they really belong to each other. Like it's 1+1, but you have to solve for them separately, right? Like there's a sequence. So, and we chose to start with to solve privacy first. So we built like this browser plugin that people then would install, but no one would do that because consumers are pretty poorly incentivized to take care of their personal data. And then we kind of like worked further with that idea, like, hey, can we manage privacy if there's a browser plugin? And then I remember, like, I think it was the 28th of November in 2018. I do remember because it was also my birthday. IAB announced the transparency and consent framework. And when we were looking at that, like it had a critical piece of what we were missing, the vendor list configuration. So really early, we jumped on that. And from there, we kind of just fully focused on building out a consent management platform, very much inspired by the IAB framework and what we did before in blockchain, and like how we wanted to present data to consumers. And that was moving into 2019. We went live on the exact date that GDPR went live. Obviously, if you go live on several clients at once, everything breaks down and like nothing works. So you work through all those technology challenges, and I would say after 6 months we were pretty stable. We grew our client portfolio, and a few months after that, we received a message from LiveRamp that they wanted to talk about a partnership.
Sounds good. So I've been working on the blockchain field almost 3 years. Just it's a kind of the new technologies for the more protected the customers' basic rights in terms of data privacy, I guess. The problem is just the GDPR, they announced the blockchain is not a perfect solutions because of the blockchain has some problems such as like the deletions or rectifications. The many things is not working in some of the structures of the decentralized models, such as the public chain has many issues. The private chain is also the many kind of the difficulties to overcome the first. So do you think the blockchain technology is the perfect to fit the future of technology industries?
Well, I still kind of think so, even though it wasn't successful for us, but I think we were pretty early. And the market at the time there was too much hype around all the ICOs. It became too economically incentivized to do anything on a blockchain. And it wasn't really about the technology and its capabilities. And so I haven't been really following it in the last 12 to 18 months. So I don't know how the capabilities have grown, but conceptually, it does make sense. And for example, the challenge that you just mentioned about the right to deletion, well, you could, for example, store data points separately, right? That was always our idea. Like we'll store the data in little snippets so that by themselves, they are not personal information. And we'll just kind of like bridge the data points in between. And that point is personal, and that will be the recognition point for that data. So I think at the time we were already thinking about like privacy preservation and differential privacy, because that was key to actually use data for any use case in a privacy safe way. Well, blockchain still can do that. But when you start talking about real-time applications based on a blockchain, that's where it gets complicated.
I see. Yeah, I am also exploring how the blockchain data works, the data protection field, because the decentralized will be the future. So I believe. So I'm exploring which kind of the industry will be started for running into the practice, not just perception. So that's kind of my challenges as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's because your startups is a very exciting to work on the space. I'm feeling the same. That's
yeah. No, yes, I fully understand that.
thank you. So move to the next topics. I'm wondering the your IAB experiences. As you explained that you had started the IAB Task Force in Europe. So what did you do that at the moment in there?
Well, it's more like what I said at the beginning is like there wasn't really a platform to discuss all the exciting and innovative developments in the industry. And so like if we would sell to like trying to sell our services to a brand or an agency, they were very often confused, like, okay, but what is it, what you exactly do? So we wanted to talk about it and we wanted to make it more mature, and we wanted to introduce standards, and we wanted to collaborate more internationally with other working groups, like, hey, can we benefit from each other's experiences? And real-time bidding was just introduced, and there was still so much work to be done, right? Like publishers needed to come on board, they needed to have the platform set up, agencies needed to have access to their DSPs. So the IAB task force was really just like, let's create a working group that is not commercially driven, like we're not selling to each other, but it's really about the development of the market. And then ultimately, I'm with the IAB now in the Netherlands for quite some time, and ultimately that led to a board member position where I now focus on privacy, data, and technology.
I see. I think the privacy and advertisement is just in a controversial at this moment, such as the today's the TechCrunch article is saying that the Apple IDFA is also is a little bit illegal under the e-privacy directive, or the Google has also their own advertisement identifications. So how we can take a balance between the advertisement effectiveness and privacy protection. So do you have any idea with that?
Yeah, like in the basis, it's transparency and control,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot more that comes with it. And like if you cannot explain to consumers why you need their data, then you're pretty lost. And if you haven't considered really carefully how to deal with data, where to store it, how to protect it, who has access to it, then you still have work to do. So there's a couple of these ingredients that need to be happening, that need to be present already. And whether there is an IDFA, like an identifier for advertising, or any other identification point, that's basically secondary. That's a technological means of solving delivering services to someone, whether that's personalization in content, whether that's a very like streamlined login experience, right? Like, for example, if you're logged into Spotify, you don't even know that you're logged in, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have access to the content. And the same is true for advertising. Advertisers want to personalize their messages, or want to be at least as relevant as possible to you, so that there's no waste, and that their ROI, their return on investment, is as positive as possible. Publishers, on the other side, they know that monetization of advertising inventory just has higher yields when there's data paired with it. If they can be more relevant to advertisers and by proxy consumers, the system just works better. So whether Apple is using your data to improve their services, or a publisher lets you log in and then like encrypts that email address and uses that as an identifier.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many different means to the same end, but the underlying core under it is the IDs, like the identifiers that we use to identify people. Now, if you ask a standard, or let's say an average phone user, whether it be Android or Apple, it doesn't really make a difference. If you ask them what an ad ID or an IDFA is, they don't know. And if you then explain it to them, they're not going to see too much upside about it, right? So why would they do it? And I think that is, as an industry, the internet has a tough job explaining why that is relevant, why they need it. Because it's very simple. If you do not do that, you'll end up paying for content, which is fine if you can afford it. But given that there is an increase of an increase of number of subscriptions in households, there's a max to that. Like it's not like you're going to pay for it's not like you're going to pay $10 for 20 subscriptions every month. Like that's just too much. So ultimately, as a consumer, like you're not being explained the value exchange. Giving data, sorry, you're not being explained the value exchange. Like it's in, you're not transparently part of it, because you don't really realize that the content that you're digesting is for free and that you're sharing your data for it. But once that would be, and like there would be an actual value over data, let's say, hey, I give permission to use my data, that kind of adds up to $2 a month. That $2 buys you this range of services or content. And I think that's the direction that we need to take.
I see. So as a framework, the IAB has been published in Europe, the TCF, the Transparency, the Consent Framework. Unfortunately, which was been rejected by the Belgian DPA recently, I guess. Then the IAB is a little bit controversial from the blogging. So do you think TCF will be keeping the standards of future advertisement framework for the other tech industries, or do we need to make any other alternative for the appropriate under the GDPR?
Yeah, so I'll start at the beginning. So thanks for that question. And then, like, I think what we're talking about with the Belgian DPA are initial findings, and IAB Europe will contest them, and rightfully so. There are a lot of reasons why they would contest it, like the fact that IAB Europe is defined as a controller. Like, I don't see a lot of merit behind that. What this indicates is that there will be an ongoing discussion in the next few years about how privacy should be organized, what's ethical, what's compliant, what makes sense for a consumer. What IAB did with their transparency and consent framework was actually really, really smart, and it's been a heroic effort ever since. We're now at the second large iteration of the framework. There will be other iterations, obviously, as opinions and insights will change over time. Whether, for example, data protection authorities as well, right? They're also maturing. They're also hiring more people. They're also becoming smarter about, hey, how should the ecosystem work? Because it's really easy to say, hey, you cannot do that. But what IAB did is, like, they looked in, okay, so how should we organize for it? What components are required? Okay, so you need a consentment. You need like an initial layer on the front asking for permission. You need to have vendors being organized, and you need to agree on a technological way of operating. And that's what the framework did. Like, it's basically standards for the rest of the industry to adhere to, with IAB Europe organizing everything around it. I don't see anything else coming close, except for countries that still work with opt-out mechanisms. But if you look at the granularity that TCF already has, and the flexibility when it comes to using different legal bases like legitimate interest, consent, or it's hard to see anything else catch up with that effort.
I see. Yeah, that's a challenging for the ad tech industries to overcome the technically the best practice to protect the balances, the consumer privacy, then ad effectiveness. Many client sides need to buy the effective, the big returns through the advertisement. From that perspective, we see a lot of new futures about the tech industry, especially like a cookieless is the one way. The Google is announced the area of this year is just they are going to prohibit it to release the third-party cookies or other things. That could be the very big challenges for the ad tech all supply chains, and they are started to work on the many tech umbrellas such as the privacy sandbox, those things. So do you think those technical conglomerates such as the privacy sandbox will work at the digital advertisement industry in the futures?
Well, I think there will be several technological solutions to solve for a similar challenge. But let's start at the beginning. So cookies were never meant to store this kind of data for. They're very limited. They disappear quickly. I think the actually storage capacity is 4 or 5 KB. Like that means you cannot even really store personal information in there, even if you wanted to. The cookie just breaks. So given the web is changing, like we needed new standards anyway. And the fact that companies are saying goodbye, for example, operating systems and browsers are saying goodbye to third-party cookies doesn't really come as a surprise, right? I think Privacy Sandbox is the proposed solution from Google. But like even though conceptually that seems fine, there are really some big challenges with it, right? So Google basically becomes the company that decides which segments can be translated into which onto which advertisers. And also Privacy Sandbox will be a solution pretty much just for Chrome. Other browsers will have their own ways of operating. Operating systems like iOS and Android might have different solutions. So it's not going to cover for everything. It's just going to be another small part that is solved technologically differently. So what LiveRamp are doing is like we've introduced the authenticated traffic solution, which is our way of combating let's say the cookieless era. But it was right anyway. Like we could have done this years ago as well, and it would have been a great solution as well. We needed better identifiers anyway. So we need to go from a largely probabilistic internet to a more deterministic internet. Because the funny thing is like having better data actually solves privacy better. So if you don't want to have your cookie permission / consent question every day, well, having a more deterministic data point really solves for that. And that's what LiveRamp is doing with ATS. Like we're going to focus on this infrastructure. We're introducing it to publishers, agencies, and brands at the moment. I think some of the latest numbers that I can mention are like we've now have 60% of the Comscore top 100 on board. And it's basically a new mechanism, a new identifier that's much more stable, has privacy by default, total control for the consumer, and it's much more stable. And the ad ecosystem is starting to integrate it. It's more and more. It's already live on about 45 DSPs and 25 SSPs. So that's really a significant change to the ad ecosystem to come up with a better alternative for when third-party cookies are gone.
Mm. I see. In terms of the data protection, it's been a very granular in each countries. The area, such as in Europe, is very protected the consumers against. The U.S. is controversial, the federal Privacy Act, but still not any specific directions except for the Californians. Like in Japan and Asian countries has the different kind of the privacy regulations. So in terms of the other tech industry, so how we can make more the international standards in this very different kind of aspect?
Yeah, really good question, and a really tricky one as well, because every country is at a different stage of maturity when it comes to privacy laws, and there will always be differences. Even if you look at the difference between CCPA slash CPRA versus GDPR, it's opt-in versus it's opt-out versus opt-in. Japan with the APPI is yet to be determined, right? Like for which data types do you need which type of permission? So there's, except for with GDPR, there's not a lot of clarity on other privacy laws on how to exactly translate them into technology. Because you need to be like, we've always said this at the beginning of Factor, it's like we're building a product for, it's like a moving target, which is really, really complicated. So you have to build in some assumptions. And what I think is that the more countries and governments will invest in clear regulation, ultimately it'll benefit advertising and marketing. It'll benefit digital experiences for consumers. But most importantly, we just need clarity on what is exactly required. And that's going to take years, right? Because there's going to be a lot of opinions. There's going to be a lot of interpretations on what means what, which is fine. But I would love to see a more mature approach, like for example in the US on a federal level when it comes to privacy regulation.
I understand. Yeah, I think this kind of the dialogue is need to be in keep an updated in accordance with the local regulatory stances. Then the US had maybe to change their political powers, and then also the Japan we will be started the new Japanese Privacy Act will be in 2022. So in those rules will be leading the new kind of the level, the granularity of privacy protections. So after that, we will try to take an balances in each country's just the kind of the adequacies of data transfer into the between the Europe, the US, the Japan, and the Europe, or those things. I think advertisement industry is a very complex, but will be connected to each other. So that's why I'm betting on how we can cooperate it together for the best practice. So lastly, I'd like you to give a message to all the listeners that maybe your business is not just only in Europe, but spreading to the other countries as well as the Japanese listeners. So please give a message to them.
Thank you, Kawai. I would say that even though this is not entirely my own message, but privacy is about strategy. It's not about compliance, not just about compliance. So getting privacy right as a company, like really being invested with like, what kind of experience do you create to your users, to your clients, like your customers? It matters. If you cannot explain something really simply, you're not going to get data in the future. So it's something to be really aware of. Take consumers serious, invest in user experience, invest in better language, and then it becomes about like who creates the best experiences. And that's when it becomes about strategy, because the best experiences win. It is good for your business. So we never really took like, never did scaremongering tactics like, hey, you're going to get a big fine if you don't install our software. We didn't want to take that approach. It was more like, hey, if you do this well, you will have increased attention and engagement from users. You're still going to have the data that you want, but you just disclose it in the right way. And it's not going to negatively impact your business. In the future, it will actually positively impact your business. So that's the key message. Don't just focus on compliance and like getting all the check boxes. Make sure that people understand what's going on, because you need them to understand in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great message. We involve the same. I established the not-for-profit, the actions here that's focusing on the privacy is no longer the compliance, it's just upside strategies. So that's kind of the new movement in the global. So that we can collaborate with the space to work together for the better futures, based on the privacy, the human rights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a great honor having a talk with the team today. So yeah, thank you for having it today.
Very welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.